Hello, buddy. Welcome back to the Tin Man's Corner channel. I'm your host, Jeffrey Tin Man Taylor, and today I'm actually finishing off this chapter I was reading out of Bigfoot Terror Tales Vol.1, and it's called The Lord Helps Those by Tonia Brown. So I'm going to continue on where I left off. For a moment alone at the apes of Dale's unnamed hill, he was left to wonder at how truly dim-witted his so-called friends were. He turned his mind for the briefest of moments to himself. Could it be possible that his own Bigfoot sighting was a setup by the very same folks who had been laughing at him the whole while? Nah, they weren't clever enough to make a costume, much less catch him at just the right time in the dark like that. No one else could have known he was moving hay at 2 o'clock in the morning. Just he and a jug of white lightning had decided on that impromptu moment of labor. In the silence of the night, Butch thought he heard the snap of a twig breaking to his right. He could almost feel the pressure of his eyes on him as leaves crunched underfoot from someone approaching. More likely something. A loud snort in the darkness confirmed this. Great, just what he needed. Some deer to wander into his path, then kick up a fuss and ruin his plans. But no, nothing sprang out or skittered by. Still, Butch couldn't shake the feeling he was being watched. Not that it mattered. Let some half-crazed possum or raccoon ogle him till the sun came up. Whatever it was probably wondering if Butch was a real Sasquatch, which filled him with even more confidence. Dressed and set, he watched the campsite from his higher vantage point, perhaps 200 yards or so from the tents proper. He waited, not in idle pause, but for something specific, something one could all but set a watch by. Jim's weak bladder needed relief. Sure enough, at 10 after midnight, Jim Walker crawled fully dressed from the confines of his cavernous tent and stumbled toward the bushes to do his business. Even at a couple hundred yards, Butch heard the steady stream of Jim's relief. I'll be like I want to hear that, really. Hit the ground. Just as Jim zipped up and returned to crawl back into his tent, Butch drew himself up as tall as he could, moved out into an open space between the trees to let the moon backlight his performance, raised his arms to the sky and growled loud and proud. Jim snapped his head up to where Butch stood, a growling and a raising the ruckus. The man stared in silent shock for half a second, then proceeded to holler, "Blue murder! Holy jumping Jehoshaphat's! What in the tarnation is that?" It was a scant moment before the others, also fully dressed, rolled out of their tents to find out what all the hoopling was about. Joshua held aloft a lit Coleman while Jim continued to babble to all the heavens and hells about what he was seeing. The quiet night carried their delicious words of worry right through the bucket's ear holes. What with all the screaming? Dale asked as he rubbed his tired eyes. "Yeah, Joshua," said, then yawned. "What's wrong?" "What is that?" Jim asked in the yell. "What?" Dale shouted back. Jim raised a shaky hand to the monster on the hill. "That!" Dale and Joshua turned as one to face Butch. Jaws dropped, eyes went wide. Butch was even prepared to bet that underpants were just bricked. All three men were quiet for a moment, but not for long. "I think it's one of them Bigfoots," Dale yelled. Eureka! That single phrase made the whole thing worth the effort of 2 weeks spent slaving over a piece of work that no one could ever know he had made. Jim said in a voice so low Butch almost didn't hear it, "Well, I'll be a monkey's uncle. Butch was right. Butch was right. Butch was right. Butch wanted to rip off the mask and scream, I told you so. I told you. I done seen a Sasquatch. You were my friends. You were supposed to believe me. Now it should be noted Butch's original plan was to duck down once spotted, slipped out of the costume, creep back to the campsite, and sneak back into his tent. In the confusion of looking for the Bigfoot, he supposed he would have plenty of time to make it back and pretend to have slept through the whole sorry affair. But instead of ducking low and sneaking off, he got greedy for more attention, greedy for additional praise, greedy to make them feel as sorry as he felt for the last 3 weeks. Instead of stooping, he stood his ground, growling and waving his arms. I am Bigfoot Butch, he thought, and I was right. Dale was the first to scramble for his rifle, setting the thing to fire with an eerie and empty click. What? He paused and popped it open to look down the chamber. I thought I loaded this thing. Give me mine, Joshua shouted. I know for a fact it was loaded. With a disappointed howl, he discovered his way was just as empty. It's okay, boys, Jim said with his usual air of confidence. I got Sweet Bessie, and she's always loaded. He reached behind him to the band of his jeans and pulled forth a pistol. Oh boy, yeah, he should have just went with his original plan and ducked, got him dressed out of that Bigfoot costume and hid back in his tent. And now he know he done a terrible thing. A .45 revolver to be exact. Oh yeah, he better go now. Sweet Betsy was a gift Butch had given Jim years ago. Time seemed to stretch paper thin as Butch caught the glint of blue steel under the bright harvest moon. A pistol! Who brought a pistol on a deer hunt? Jim Walker, apparently. Butch tried to crouch, but it was too late. Jim whipped the pistol around to aim and fire before Butch realized things have gone far beyond his control. The revolver cracked the night wide open with a loud report. Pain bloomed in Butch's gut. He stumbled back, then forward, and before he could catch himself, he tumbled the whole 200 yards down the hill, trailing a wide streak of blood and gut juice all over the moonlit trail behind him. Once at the bottom, he groaned and moaned and rolled about, clutching at the sight of his now gushing belly wound. Oh, yeah. That's making my stomach hurt right now. He should have just stopped while he was ahead. Gee gosh, Dale shouted. You hit it. Of course I did, Jim said. You shot me. Butch groaned in a muffled tin of the bucket, in which he drilled ear holes and eye holes, but not a mouth hole. The words came out as part grumble, part growl. Good hit, Joshua said. I never missed, Jim said. I can't believe you shot me, Butch yelled. Nothing but pain moans came out of the bucket mask. It sounds pissed, Joshua said. Butch writhing at the edge of the camp, wishing the guys would stop fooling around and figure out it was all a game and get him out of the costume and into an ambulance. Yes, but he should have cut a mouth hole out just so it would project what he's saying better instead of growling. Before anyone could do anything, a wild roar thundered from the top of the hill. What was that? Jim asked. Butch struggled into a sitting position as he held onto his belly and tried very hard not to die. He wanted to get the mask off, but the bucket must have suffered some damage in the tumble because it was now stuck fast onto his head. He tried to motion for them to help him to recognize how stupid and lame his costume was, but the other men were far too distracted by the new noise. The roar came again, this time followed by the crack of a snapping tree branches and the rush of something approaching the camp. Something very large, very strong, and very angry. Holy bananas, Joshua said. Look at that. There's another one, Dale yelled. Butch swiveled his head about to catch a sight he never expected to see again. Bigfoot, or rather, big feets. There must have been 5 or 6 of them, maybe even more. It was hard to keep count once they started pouring out of the tree line. 3 weeks back in the dark of the cow pasture and from a respectable distance, the lone Sasquatch looked almost friendly, but here in the woods with the orange glow of a smoldering campfire and Dale's lantern, they were the most frightening thing Butch ever seen. Each Sasquatch boasted a mouthful of madness, twisted, yellowing, razor-sharp fangs. They didn't mind presenting to the four frightened men as easy 8 feet apiece. They leaped across the campsite until the scene was saturated with Sasquatch. From the growling and roaring and great gnashing of teeth, Butch couldn't tell these bad boys weren't here to ask for a cup of sugar. They were here to kill. Jim tried to raise his pistol, but the beasts were far too fast. 3 pounced on him, tearing the man a limb from bloody limb, tossing aside body parts and organs, which landed in a wide circle about the fray with a wet slop or gurgling scream accompany his slaughter like some horrific soundtrack, until there were no lungs or throat or vocal cords left from which Jim could scream his death call. Dale stood his ground, clutching his empty rifle and reciting the Lord's Prayer, but the beast took the poor Dale in much the same manner they did Jim. Ever the brave one, Joshua acted on natural instincts and tried to run like hell. The beasts were too quick and too good. One leapt upon Joshua's back and sank his sizable fangs into the man's neck, and down they went together. Joshua screamed for 3 seconds before all went quiet. Then there was one. Butch trembled as he held his gut and squeezed his eyes shut and waited for the end. Instead of the end, a great snorting rose up about him, as if several dozen nostrils were taken in his smell. Part blood and fear and sweat and crap and piss. The costume was a miasmic mix of human stink and animal reek, and who only knew what else after rolling down the path, yet still the nostrils sniffed and snorted. A moment later, Butch left the ground as many hands lifted him, then carried him Roman style into the forest beyond, many big hands of many big feet. Was it the stink of his 20-year-old carpet that saved his life, or was it simply the look of the costume? Butch couldn't be sure about any of that. He could only focus on one question. What would happen to him once they realized the costume was just that? A costume, nothing more. A costume sheltering a human. Thinking back on the preacher's sermon and those 7 words that got him into this whole mess to begin with, Butch decided he had to take matters into his own hands. With a wince, he realized his tight grip on the belly wound, then stretched his arms out wide, almost revealing in the feel of his warm life fluid seeping into the depths of the filthy costume what would happen when the Bigfoot found out he was a man and not one of them. With any luck and the Lord's blessing, he prayed he would die before he was unfortunate enough to find out. Like I said earlier, he should have just crouched down, took the costume off, and went back into his tent, right? And act like he slept through the whole thing. But no, he wanted to get more praise because they're looking at him as a Bigfoot. And also, and if he hadn't done that, he wouldn't have got shot. And also, he should have cut out a hole in the mouth just so he could, like, speak and the words could come out of his helmet better. But them other Bigfoots must have heard the gunshot and saw him roll down, and they figured, oh, it's another Bigfoot that got hurt, and they were going to kill the humans. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on post notifications for more book reading content like this. This has been another successful installment of the Tin Man's Corner channel. I'm your host, Jeffrey Tin Man Taylor. I say that's a wrap, and have a nice day, y'all.